welcome to the very first episode of Get to Know Your Neighbor, an interview show featuring the people and residents who make up Long Hill Township. And I'm your host, Tiffany Oshinsky. For the very first episode, I thought it would be apropos to feature the man who is currently in charge of Long Hill, Mayor Guy Piserchia. Thank you so much for joining me, Guy.
Tiffany, thank you. Hopefully I can share some insights.
Oh, definitely. I think your life is going to be very interesting and people are going to be very interested in hearing what you have to say. So to start, let's talk about how this isn't your first rodeo as mayor and why you decided to even become mayor.
Well, we moved into town in 1994, and at that time, and really right up until 2012, I was still working in Manhattan, so the hours were quite long. But I wanted to get involved in the town on some level, so I filled out a volunteer form, listed what I had done in the past. My first job out of college was in the Department of Planning in Jersey City. So I thought the zoning board or the planning board might be interesting. So that's what I put down. So I was first elected in November '09, took office in January of 2010. I was on the Board of Adjustment, the zoning board, for 8 years or so. And I was also appointed by then Mayor George Vitorera to be on the Finance Advisory Board because of my financial background. So when I was elected, I had a very good understanding of both the zoning laws in Long Hill, of the master plan, and of the municipal budget. That was a very good foundation for being an elected official. I didn't learn on the job. I had already been involved in the town.
Okay, so let's go back just a little. You had mentioned that you moved here to Long Hill. Where did you grow up and what was life like when you were growing up?
So I grew up in Jersey City, right across the river from Manhattan. But my main interest, besides going to school, which my parents insisted on, athletically was baseball. And so I played baseball right up until halfway through college. And I actually played soccer, but we did that more to stay in shape. I had never played soccer before, but I played for a few years as well.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, center fielder for the Baltimore Orioles. Things were going great until I into college, and the curveballs in college were a little bit more difficult to hit than they were in high school.
So you ended up playing in college. Tell me, did you get recruited to play in college? And what was that?
No. I was a walk-on at Seton Hall. And at that time, Seton Hall, I think they still are very good, but at that time they were really very good. They had just come off a couple of years playing in the College World Series. So being a walk-on, I was fortunate to be chosen. So I stayed with the team for a couple of years. By my end of my junior year, I figured I wasn't really going to get drafted, so it was on to something else.
So you gave up on the baseball dream and studied European history at college. Can you talk about why you decided to get into history?
Well, I love history. I still read history. Right on my nightstand is a biography of Winston Churchill. And the plan at the time was to go to law school. So a combination of me liking history, which I still do, I still read history books, and the plan to go to law school was the combination which led to. And European history, to me, everything that exists today in the world geopolitically really is a result of World War II. So I don't think you can understand the world today without having at least some knowledge of World War II.
So how did history play a role with what you ended up doing after college?
Well, not a lot, I suppose, because I didn't go to law school. My college advisor at the time had said, Guy, why don't you go out into the real world, so to speak, work for a year. And if after that year you'd like to go to law school, we'll see what we can do. So I applied for and was hired by the Department of Planning in Jersey City. And I worked for a year. As time went on, I realized that wasn't going to be my career choice. So going back to school entered the picture. And it was either law school or business school at that time. I wasn't a business major undergrad, but a close friend of mine had graduated, my roommate, and had been hired in New York. And he worked in foreign exchange, and I thought, what a cool way to make a living. You have to know what's going on in the world. There's that history, political part, but it was very competitive. But I liked the idea of the winning and the losing aspect of foreign exchange trading. So I applied to every bank in New York, everyone. And everyone sent me back these nice letters saying, thank you, but no thank you. And I saved those letters. Those letters are somewhere in a box because I used them as motivation. And I was very blessed because the only bank that offered me a trading job was Citibank. And at the time, Citibank was by far and away the proving ground and the training ground in foreign exchange. So I was very fortunate.
So for those of us who might not know, can you explain exactly what foreign exchange trading is?
Well, foreign exchange is really, foreign currencies are no different than any other commodity or asset. It's just like stocks or bonds or metals. They go up in price and they go down in price. And to put it in its most simple terms, you want to buy lower than you sell it or sell higher than you buy it. And there's a whole lot of information that goes into that. You read a lot, you watch the news, and frankly, I think a lot of luck as well. So you combine that and hopefully you're successful.
What were some of the places that you got to travel to while working in foreign exchange?
Well, and Tiffany, that's a very good observation on your part. The word foreign is in the title. And as a result, you do travel a lot, which to me was really an attraction. So for work, Europe-wise, I was in London, Paris, Vienna, and also to Asia. So Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong. At one point, I in fact did accept a position in Asia. So we lived in Singapore for 2.5 years. And while there, I was able to travel with my family to, you name it, we were there, whether it was Cambodia, Angkor Wat. Business-wise, we had offices in 5 locations: Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Taipei, and Seoul. So those were a route I would have to take quite often. So I was very blessed that we were very blessed in that regard, that we were able to see parts of the world that I don't think typically we would have seen.
So in the midst of all of this, you had mentioned that your daughter was 2 years old when you were living in Singapore. What was it like to have such a young family while being involved with all these international travels?
Well, I think personally, the frustrating part about that, we had a 2-year-old daughter at the time. Our son came, although my son was conceived in Singapore, so we often say that he's part Asian, and my wife is from Asia. So there was an affinity for that part of the world because of my wife. But I think personally, as a father of a young daughter, that part I didn't particularly like. I would say when we lived in Asia, I was gone for 2 weeks out of every month. It could be in and out. So I would be gone for a few days, come back, or I would be gone for a week. So from that perspective, it was frustrating. But I think for my family, we lived in Singapore. And I remember when we were about to move there, I had an Australian friend who had lived there. And I asked him, what's Singapore like? And he said, well, Singapore is Asia for beginners. And what he meant by that is everything we would do, generally speaking, there would be someone who spoke English. And you go there as an expatriate, you go as an expat, and that's a wonderful life for especially a child. My wife had a nice job in commercial real estate accounting, which she left when we had our daughter. So she gave up an awful lot. So when we moved to Singapore, it was like, living at a resort. You could almost eat off the sidewalks. That's how clean it is. And somebody once said to my wife, when I come back, I want to come back as an expat wife. And my wife, without missing a beat, said, no. You want to come back as an expat child. My daughter became a phenomenal swimmer. There was an Olympic-sized pool at the complex we lived in. And by the age of 3, she could swim the length. We were on vacation one time in Thailand or wherever we were, and we're sitting, by the pool, and there's this little 2.5-year-old just walking around the pool. And all of a sudden, she decides to jump in. And everybody at the pool rushes and looks at the parents. What awful parents you are. Your daughter. All of a sudden, this little tot pops up and swims the length of the pool. And they look at, oh my goodness. So, every day was a play date for my daughter.
A little fish out of water.
Oh my goodness, yes. She was a great swimmer.
Does she still like to swim? I know that she's a bit older now.
No, she doesn't swim as much. It's not easy, right, to swim, but she did take up Taekwondo. Both my daughter and my son are black belts. My son is a 3rd-degree black belt. My daughter's a 4th-degree black belt. And that, honestly, to me, didn't mean a lot. But to be a 4th degree means you are licensed or sanctioned out of Seoul. And so my daughter can open up a dojo anywhere in the world. She is licensed or whatever that's called to do so. She won't, I don't think, but someday she may return to it.
That's amazing. Don't mess with your daughter or son. So why did you decide to get out of foreign exchange?
Well, so, it kind of ties together with this interview. So I was working in foreign exchange for quite a number of years, and I loved it. I never changed loving the aspect of knowing what was going on in the world or the competitive nature of it. You always feel something every day. You win or you lose. And I enjoyed that. And I still do in my current role. But in 2012 or so, I semi-retired to focus a little bit on my role as an elected official here in Long Hill. So 2012, the situation presented itself where I could kind of retire a little bit for a few years and maybe focus a little bit on the town. It happened right at the same time that Superstorm Sandy hit. And I became acting mayor at the time. And then I was mayor again in 2013 and 2014. So I was blessed in that regard that I could really focus on township issues.
So going back just a little bit, how exactly did you end up in Long Hill?
Well, that friend that I referenced earlier, who had my roommate from college, who I also went to high school with, he had the job in Manhattan. So he started life after college life sooner than I did. He had a job first. He was married. He also grew up in Jersey City. He came out west and bought a home in Chatham Township. But by the time I started looking at homes, Chatham and Summit were too expensive. We couldn't really afford those areas. So we kind of went a little west from those towns, and we found Long Hill. And by that point, we had looked at maybe 30 plus homes. And I said to my wife, I just can't take time off from work. So my wife was the first one to come into Long Hill. And even though Millington train station is still a sleepy little part of town, it was even more so then. The bank wasn't there. And I guess she didn't have a cell phone because I think she called me from a, what are those things called again? A phone. Yeah, payphone. I forgot what that is. My children don't know what a payphone is. And she said, I think I'm in Petticoat Junction. So she said, you have to come out here. And I did. And I said, this is beautiful. We looked at the house, and it was a third more house on a third more land for a third less in price than what the homes were that we were looking at in Chatham and Summit. And I remember driving away, looking out at the Great Swamp, right? 9,000 acres. I said, is this on a toxic dump? How is this even possible? And with that, our neighbor comes driving by. We didn't know her at the time. She stops because she had little children. And she was saying, hi, you looking at the home across the street? Yeah. Do you have any children? Because she wanted playmates for her children. And from there we went, oh, this is perfect.
So what exactly was it about Long Hill that made you want to get involved in the politics of it and actually, become mayor?
Well, you know what? Actually, I hadn't thought about this in a long time. Close friend of mine was on the township committee. His name is Jerry Aranio. And what he did is we would talk periodically. And there's a property right across from Town Hall. It was called the Kurz property. And a lot of people in town still call it that because it was owned by the Kurz family. His vision at the time was to purchase it for open space. And he knew that I had an interest in open space. He knew why we had moved to Long Hill. I don't know if you realize Long Hill Township is 50% open space. Now, a lot of that, of course, is the Great Swamp. And we have challenges because we can flood. We haven't flooded, I think, since 2011, but we can. So there's a lot of floodplain challenges that the town has. Anyway, his vision was that the property across the street could be purchased as open space. And I agreed with him. So when I ran for office, motivation at the time was, in fact, to purchase that property across the street. And that took some time because we applied for a county grant from the County Open Space Program. And we have a very active open space program here in Long Hill as well. So it took several years, but ultimately we did purchase the property across from Town Hall. And we could tie in what's happened in more recent years when township residents voted overwhelmingly to sell the wastewater plant, the sewer system. And that is opening up some financial flexibility for us. We probably never would have reached that point, and certainly not in my lifetime, where we could have developed a park across the street. We've already started, and we will do it more aggressively, where we ask residents what they'd like to see there. Perhaps another ball field, a bandstand, a pool, a swimming pool. I don't know. I think that's more problems than it's worth, but I know a lot of residents in town say that. Maybe another basketball court. Certainly walking trails. The property across the street that we purchased is about 73 acres. It connects to another property of 40 acres, which heads due west, which comes out right behind the Sterling Hotel. So you have about 110 acres. Only about 8 acres can be developed because they're wetlands. But wetlands do permit trails. So the idea is that we would have trails that go all the way from Cantor, across the street, all through those 70 plus acres to the 40 acres and come out at the Sterling Hotel.
That'd be pretty cool. Okay, so this is kind of like a two-part question. I'm going to start with the bad first, and then we'll go with the good. What is something that you had wanted to have happen during your time as mayor or on the committee that has not been able to happen yet?
Well, I think we referenced earlier that the township has flooding issues. So when I was first elected, and I can't take credit for this, it was a previous committee or two that had worked with the federal government and with the state on a plan to help mitigate that flooding. So the Army Corps of Engineers was involved, and the federal government, our then Congressman Freelandheisen, worked very hard on securing some funding for that flood wall. And flood wall, it's really not a wall, it's probably the size of a desk for about a mile. So the funding was ultimately put in place over a number of years. So what started out as a $6 million project became a $10 million project. But it became a very emotional issue for the town. There were legitimate questions regarding would it cause increased flooding upstream or downstream, north of the Passaic River, south of the Passaic River. The Passaic River, when it starts, the headwaters are up in Mendham, winds its way down through Long Hill, and then, of course, continues on its way. The problem for Long Hill is when the river passes through Long Hill, the water always slows down, almost to a crawl. When we get a severe rainstorm, or when you come out of the winter like you do now in the snow, and then you get a storm, that's kind of like a danger point for when we might flood. So the storm, we don't flood during the storm. It could be like a day and a half later on a blue sky day where the water just can't work its way through town and it backs up into town. So this flood project that the Army Corps of Engineers designed, they said it would prevent the 100-year flooding. which we had that 100-year flood 3 times in 5 years, 5 or 6 years. So it was really on our minds. There were a lot of supporters for it, but the ones that questioned whether it would work and work without hurting other locations, they had legitimate concerns. And so ultimately, the flood wall passed 3-2, but it fails because to pass a bond ordinance, you must have a supermajority. So you needed 4 votes. So to answer your question, I think what's frustrating is we haven't figured out a way to address that flooding.
Okay, on the flip side, let's talk about something that you're proud of that has happened while you've been mayor or even on the committee.
Any elected official will tell you their most important responsibility is to provide services to the residents that they deserve and expect through their property taxes, but at a cost that is reasonable. Now, Long Hill Township has a challenge that most towns don't have. Only 9% or so of our property taxes come from business ratables. So the challenge there is to provide those services and try to keep as best a lid as you can on the municipal portion of the budget. A lot of people don't realize that. The Township Committee only controls 24 cents on every property tax dollar. 65% are for local schools, the regional high school and K through 8. And then you have county taxes and county open space. So you asked, what are we most proud of? And it started a couple of years before I was elected. And they started us on the road toward fiscal responsibility, in my opinion. So what I'm most proud of is in the 12 years, we haven't done this year's budget yet, but in the 12 years that I've been on the Township Committee, the municipal portion of the property tax bill that everybody receives has gone up roughly 16% in total. So that's about 1.4% per year, which is a remarkable achievement by any definition, more so because of that 91.9% breakdown I gave you. And I can't take credit for that. I mean, every committee person for the last 15 years has worked very hard on this. And the challenge has been, when I was first elected, I think we had close to $20 million in debt. And as a result of the sale of the sewer system, we have none. We are debt-free. And as a result, we're now in a position where we can start addressing some things that seemed out of reach just a couple of years back. We just purchased an ambulance, which will pay off over the next couple of years. I think a lot of people don't realize that the First Aid Squad is 100% volunteer. They deserve the municipality to help them provide the equipment that they use to serve the residents in town. And so we want to be able to provide them with the equipment to serve your neighbors, my neighbors. Another thing I'm very happy with, because this thing I fought for years to get, is the turf field right out here at Cantor. We can never figure out a way to pay for it. It's one of those things, it's a great idea, but how do you pay for it? We found an anchor tenant who was willing to pay rent to use the turf field if we built it. And so they pay $170 an hour to use it. They're happy, we're happy. It's paying off the bond that was used to construct the field. We do not charge our rec programs a dime to use the turf field, not a dime. The only thing they pay is if we turn on the lights at night, there's a nominal fee for the electricity. And for me, I believe very strongly that one of the responsibilities of municipal government is to provide as much recreation facilities as we can.
What about your bucket list? What's on your bucket list?
Well, as a result of the residents of Long Hill voting to sell the wastewater system, I think I referenced earlier, we have some financial flexibility in the years going forward. So there are certain things like the ladder truck for the Millington Fire Company, I think is important. We put that off because we just couldn't afford it. Now, I think with creative financing, whether we lease the ladder truck over a number of years, I think we're in a position to provide one. I think it would be nice to develop the property across the street. That was always the intent. Trails through wetlands are quite expensive. We'll work with the county and the state to apply for grants, perhaps the federal government as well, and provide some ourselves. So I think those are the two things that I'd like to see.
Is there anything else you want to tell the town and residents of Long Hill?
Enough of me. As I said, all credit goes to the residents of Long Hill Township and to its volunteers. They make being an elected official in town a pretty simple job.
Well, that's the end of the main part of the interview. Now it's time for the lightning round. So the way that this works is I'm going to ask you a few questions to really get to know you. So I want you to answer these questions as fast as you can without really thinking, just, whatever comes to mind. Okay, first question. If you could only eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Chicken Parmesan.
What is your favorite book?
The Little Prince.
What song would you sing at karaoke night?
Ragdoll.
What is your favorite movie?
Without question, Casablanca. Isn't it everybody's?
Big Lebowski. What is your favorite vacation spot?
I would say Cabo San Lucas. We've been there many times. I've been there by myself and with my family. So I would say Cabo San Lucas, but more recently, the Outer Banks.
This is a good question for you because you're a history guy. If you could go back in time to any point in history, where would you want to go?
Civil War.
What TV show are you currently watching / binging?
Oh my goodness. The Americans.
Oh, it's a great show. I finished that recently. What celebrity would you want to get a cup of coffee with? Dead or alive?
Thomas More, St. Thomas More. Because my second favorite book is A Man for All Seasons.
If you were a superhero, what would your superpower be?
I don't know if this is a superpower. To get people to check their egos and their political affiliations at the door and talk to each other. Because I'm convinced 90% of the world's problems are just because of stubbornness. Yeah, I don't know if that was what you're looking for. You're looking for I can fly? How about I can fly? I would like to be able to fly without being on an airplane.
There you go. Well, that's it for the lightning round, and that's it for our interview. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on Get to Know Your Neighbor. I hope that the town of Long Hill got to know you a little bit better today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the residents of Long Hill Township.
If you know someone who should be featured on Get to Know Your Neighbor, drop us an email at longhillmedia@longhillnj.gov. Put Get to Know Your Neighbor in the subject and tell us why this person should be featured on our show. Be sure to include your contact information as well as the contact info of the person you're suggesting.